What do I need to do? Just close it like normal? Okay.
I am just getting on YouTube. I know you have.
Should I hit the gavel now? All right, it's close to 6 o'clock. I'm gonna go ahead and call the Planning Commission meeting to order. We'll go around the room and then on the Zoom camera and just say your name and that you're here.
Barry Beatty, present.
And Bell here.
John Marshall, present.
John Lehman, present.
And so it shows that we have John Derby, Marissa Doyle, and Seth who are absent. There is a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Short agenda for tonight. We have basically, so the continuation of the Willamette Forks extension and updates from the city. Do we have any public comment scheduled for this evening's meeting?
None that we received prior to the meeting and nobody here in attendance.
Okay. If that's the case, let's jump into commission business, which would be a revisit of the Willamette Forks extension request. We had some good discussions about this request last meeting and basically had some questions for the person requesting the extension and also from city and the legal issues, if any, about extensions and so forth. Do you have any information for us?
Yeah, I can give you a quick update of the packet materials. Just real quick, Adam Hanks, City Administrator. I'm sitting in for Megan tonight. She's out. In the staff report that is provided for you, it's very similar to last month's staff report. There is a section summary of Planning Commission meeting March 20th. So that gives a quick summary of the discussion that you had at the last meeting. And then there was a submittal marked as attachment A, which I think is the updated exchange with the applicant subsequent to your meeting. Yes, dated March 29th and April 4th. So there was a little bit more information provided by the applicant, hopefully addressing some of the conversation that the commission had in March.
Okay. I was satisfied in a conversation with city administrator about not necessarily needing legal counsel on the issue of extensions. That it's sort of a blanket thing as long as they meet the criteria is set by the city. And then reading through attachment A before the meeting, it seemed like I had an answer as to some of the reasoning behind the delay for construction. And do you have any other things to add?
Yeah, maybe I'll just summarize real quick. As you, I'm sure, talked about last meeting, there's 4 criteria that give the commission some context and structure to granting extensions. Of the 4 of them, D is probably the most significant criteria to look at, and I think that was the request for additional information. And the only other add-on to that is from the staff perspective, the extension is a one-time extension of 6 months from the date of the expiration. So the fact that we continue doesn't necessarily extend the 6 months on. It's not necessarily from the time the council or the commission approves the request. It's 6 months from the expiration of the original. And just as another clarification, probably more for the public record than for the commissioners, the extension does not modify any aspect of the prior approval. All elements of the prior approval remain the same. And that is one of the criteria that if there was a request for alterations, it likely any significant alteration request would be a modification. It wouldn't be an extension. So that's kind of the distinction. Really the only way to do an extension is if you are, you know, not triggering anything that would be a modification of the use or the proposed structures or anything like that. So just a clarification for everyone. And I think that puts the you know, the if granted, the extension would be into September.
Yeah, I was looking at the original request and it looked like the beginning of March. So,
Yep.
Beginning of September. Are there any thoughts or questions, concerns, in light of the new information?
Was city staff acceptable to his explanation?
Yeah, you know, I
Acceptable?
I think, you know, maybe there was some specific, you know, jumped from, you know, weigh 30,000 foot and then he jumped into, you know, went down to some real details. But I think it's a fairly common in my experience that financing and contracting, you know, are two common problems or potential delay issues. And I think from a code perspective, I think the code of granting of one extension of 6 months provides the commission with the ability to accommodate, but also not really risk a whole lot, not stretch things out too far. Another, you know, reason for a potential to deny an extension would be if the codes have changed since the original approval. And, you know, that to me is a key provision. That's one of the best provisions of you want to have a tool that if codes have changed, you don't want to grant extensions to grandfather a project that has some key things that the community would rather see the new code address on a project. And since that's not the case here, I think that's probably the more impactful component of this, and that isn't the case here. So I think it's a, you know, from a staff perspective, I feel we feel comfortable with it. I have no further questions.
So was the original request for a restaurant bar and then it was changed to be market, bakery and restaurant? So isn't that a modification?
No, my understanding was he just was imprecise wording more than anything. He can't change for an extension. It would be impossible.
So will you have an OLCC license?
That I don't know.
He could. The original, the approval that the extension is before you tonight, yes, could, would be one of the allowable uses, my understanding. It's you know, the approval included kind of a variety of potential uses. I think maybe a bit of, maybe not a challenge, but a bit of the sorting out would be, there's, from my understanding, I haven't studied the backdrop extensively, but what is the primary use versus what are the accessory uses might have been part of a little bit of the jumbling, you know, of you know, what one is tagged as primary and what are accessory incidental uses.
That seems to leave a little bit of an opening as far as the primary and accessory uses. I mean, what we approved, or the commission approved at that time, a 3-step, you know, brewery, blah, blah, blah. Then it came back, a grocery store, a bakery and things. What, as what I'm trying to say here is what could we expect going in there if there isn't a defined primary and saying, this is what it has to be?
Well, you know, again, the extension is only for what the commission ultimately ended up approving originally. So the wording, as the chair mentioned, any wording that he put in some of his extension language really is kind of inconsequential to that question. The question that you asked, what staff would do is look back at the original approval and say, those are the uses that are allowed. Now, if there's any ambiguity there, you know, that's kind of a bit water under the bridge and it's left to administrative analysis to kind of sort that out. But this particular action in front of you, the wording that he's putting forward in his explanation of A, B, C, and D, don't have any implications or impact on the original approval.
So they're bound to what was originally proposed.
Yep, this is a time extension only to the prior approval.
Is there a completion date component on our approval in terms of how far out can he extend the work to get it completed and open?
Building permits.
Right, yeah, so to be able to keep this eligible, so if the extension is granted, the date is early September, as we noted. If no activity, no building permits have been pulled at that time, then it's start all over. Then it's a 100% start all over. With the process, probably not a pre-app, probably could administratively skip the pre-app, but basically a fresh application comes forward to the commission. If they do start the project, and the definition of starting a project doesn't take a whole lot, honestly, they have to just initiate construction activities, which can be, a temp power pole, or it could be, a general electrical permit or anything that gets it started. And then, of course, as long as they have building permits active, and by building code, you have to have an inspection at least once every 6 months to keep a building permit active. So yeah, I've seen it in other places. I mean, it's super rare, and it's not usually what an applicant wants to do anyway, but it can get strung out for years and years and years. If they, I've seen it happen where they kind of on purpose for a short while string it out in between financing, challenges and that kind of thing. So there's a strategy there, but it's a very legal strategy, and it's really outside of the planning commission's purview at that point. If it's inactive and the building permits expire, then the land use approval could expire as well, but only at if the building permit activity progress towards completion is kind of the terminology. So
If the building permits are pulled and he gets these building permits, how much time are they in place? Or
as long as an inspection happens, at least within every 6 months, a building permit can stay active for years and years. Yeah.
And minimal work can be done in that 6 months, and that would still will satisfy the.
Yeah, enough work to trigger the next logical inspection. So, but that does leave a lot of room. I've seen a lot of room in there.
So it's just an inspection occurs, not that it gets passed.
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, the code does have, if you fail the same inspection more than twice, you start getting charged for future inspections, and there are some moderate financial penalties to totally rigging the game. But yeah, in the intention, I suppose if it got really extreme and there was some kind of public good to dig in further, you could look at the implications of the land use approval for alongside a delay tactic on the building code side. I think that typically there's many other forces that keep the projects either going or they just expire out, and then we're left. Then it just it can be in a half completed state, and all approvals need to start over, but there's no clock for when they start over. They just kind of sit.
Yikes. Anybody have questions or concerns on Zoom?
Sorry, I have no concerns at this time. I'm curious, out of curiosity, and this is out of the scope, so I'm not sure if it's even worth mentioning, but is he trying to sell the Elkhorn? That's my understanding, is that this might be contingent upon sale of the Elkhorn. So it might slow it down, it might speed it up if it sells.
I agree with you. That's out of scope. We could do the legal speculation. I don't know that. Yeah, I think your intuition on that might be on target, but obviously for purposes of this action, it is irrelevant. But from a practical standpoint, that could be.
Based on what I saw in the paper, I think, yeah, might be a possibility.
I have one more quick question for their staff. If, somebody, this change, I mean, this was significant. A request for another 6 months extension. That doesn't happen too often, I don't think. And during our planning commission meeting, there was several of the commissioners zeroed in on that exact issue. The explanation of why he needs the extension. Would it be appropriate or is that, I mean, I know you can't force somebody to do anything. You suggest that they come to a commission meeting with a significant change like that, just so we could get additional feedback. I mean, from planning standpoint, would they say, I would advise you to show up, something.
Right,
like that.
right. You know, from a legal perspective, you cannot utilize that as a basis for, you know, your approval or your decision. They are not required to be in attendance for any land use action. I think, you know, your point is well taken that typically it's to an applicant's advantage to be in attendance, but it is not required. And, you know, if findings for a decision would be ripe for appeal or protest if the findings indicated that a component of the decision was because the applicant wasn't in attendance. That would be problematic from a legal standpoint. If they chose to poke at it.
Other thoughts, comments, concerns? I would love to hear a motion to approve the Willamette Forks extension request. With the understanding, of course, that the wording of the original document is what is binding.
Also move.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye or raise a hand.
Aye.
I
So approved. We'll talk again about this, I imagine, in August or September. Updates and future agenda items, city administration report, please.
I don't know exactly what's typical or protocol, but I'd be glad to step through that document. This is the city administration report that was provided in the council packet April 9th. If you'd like, I could pop through them real quick, or if you want just questions, I'm here I'll answer anything you got, or even anything off the menu if you want.
The only question that jumped to my mind, rather than going through it all, is how are we doing on the water system projects?
Yeah, we talked about that one at council as well, and you know, the last time we talked extensively about that with council was a study session, I think in September. October. We have Consor under contract to do a water capacity analysis, and that's really, we haven't paused on the water projects, but they've naturally kind of slowed. We're still working on the well. The well has been piped and done. Now it's the treatment, the well house, the treatment facility, and then prepping for the actual transmission line that would connect that to the system. That's in play right now. But the capacity analysis is what we talked with council about. When we get that back, we can couple that with the capital improvements plan that we just recently had adopted by council. We had a work session on that in March, and where we talked about water extensively. We had a meeting last week with Business Oregon, which is the kind of the overseer of our water loan package. So we are really honing in on knowing how much we have left in funds for the projects that we were hoping to complete. And really the not so spoiler alert is less money, more projects. We aren't going to get as far as we hoped, even probably from when I first got here in July. But July is when we committed to council, as long as we have the water capacity analysis done from Consor, that's the natural time. We'll have all the loan information. We'll have a really good sense of the well project, what's left to be done in the coming fiscal year. We'll have our balances pretty squared away to know where our water system, the extent of the projects, how far we can get, and then prioritizing what remains. That may or may not be a big shuffle compared to the way it's laid out now. It kind of depends on the capacity analysis to help us determine if we need to shuffle those around a little bit. But yeah, circle July. July should be a really good understanding of really where we are in the water system. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, a follow-up to that, is it, and I'm kind of coming in from way behind. So, was there an initial capacity analysis done before the well was even, or property even bought, or the well even drilled, or, and is there a significant difference between the two?
Sort of. So I think the prior, there wasn't a specific separate capacity analysis done prior. That was done in conjunction with the water master plan. So the water master plan laid out four stages or four phases of capital improvements. And then the loan after that was, going out to get funding to accomplish that master plan. The original, of course, pre-COVID, 2018, 19, the engineer estimates and project costs were much lower than what we ended up experiencing. So the loan, the total, including city match and all of that, is about $6.5 million. There's some forgivable loan in there. So our loan amount is 4.6, but the total package of spend was about 6.5. That didn't go as far as it was originally intended in 2018 and 19. But specific to the well, I think there was clearly a hope and a bit of an expectation that the well would produce more than what we ended up getting out of the well. That's for sure. It's still nothing to sneeze at, I would say. I mean, we're still in the 15 to 20%, additional supply capacity for the system. That's not bad. But when you divide it by, it costs the same amount of money to get a 600 gallon a minute well as it does 160. If we got, a 300 out of it, the cost per gallon a minute would definitely be less. But nevertheless, it was clearly defined in the master plan as, as another water supply opportunity, and that it was pursued. This capacity analysis really looks at, are we best suited to once we get that online, after we get that water source online, are we really best suited to focus in on storage, and really go back to pushing hard to find external funding for a large third reservoir? What can we gain by retrofitting the existing two reservoirs? There's an incremental gain in storage there. Then there's also all the stuff on the east side, looping. What benefits to the water system in capacity and service to customers would come from doing the looping projects. There's two different looping projects, one smaller than the other, but both pretty important for how the system functions. So that's really what the capacity analysis will give us. I think in addition, and I've kind of done a little teaser to council, in addition, we'll probably be needing to look at, what is our long-term supply? Kind of revisit that question, because clearly well 3, while I'm not sure if well 3 was ever intended to be the kind of the panacea for long-term supply. I don't know if that was intended and how it was done. I would guess not. But there's still a long-term water supply conversation to be had. Probably the beginnings of that will be in July, but that will last far longer than the conversations about how we finish out spending that $4.5 million loan.
That could include even another well.
Could. I think we want to explore all options and compare them with kind of updated reality and updated. I think one of the benefits of taking a bit of a pause and doing the capacity analysis is the population growth that the 2016 master plan was built upon didn't really happen the way and several other things were built on those projections at the time, and that hasn't come to pass. But what also has come to pass that wasn't in there really is the potential large user water use of maximizing the economic development of that 107 acres. If that is what we are kind of striving for, or at least conceptually partnering on, the region is and the city, that's a significant driver of the conversation of long-term water supply. Is how do we how does the region, us with the region, help facilitate the water and wastewater infrastructure needs to do what Business Oregon and Lane County and really the region would like to see for high intensity of jobs and high wage jobs in that 107 acres that also, at least right now, the targets that would accomplish both of those things also require a pretty heavy amount of water and wastewater that we don't have capacity for. So that will be kind of the next thing after we close out the water projects that we had in our eyesight with the loan funds that we have. There's about 2 million left of those loans, and that won't get us very far by the time we do the transmission line to connect the well number 3 up. We will be working that down. Hopefully not to the very end. We would like to squeeze. There's 2 other projects we'd like to squeeze in there, but we just don't know what that transmission line. We have an engineer's estimate, but we'll know better in July. Kind of on all fronts, we'll have better information.
In that discussion, I think what is Pioneer Estates, that what it's
Pioneer Valley Estates. Yep.
they're hooked up to our system and they get water.
Yep.
Has that changed at all in the past 15 years since I was involved with the council? I mean, that came up, that was a big heavy item that we.
Yeah, we had an open house for all of the PVE residents. Councilor Lehman was there. I think it was October, November of last year. Had a rousing conversation, trying to correctly, from our side is saying, yeah, we need to put it in our capital improvements plan. It didn't exist in the capital improvements plan, and we need to put it in there. So it's in the adopted capital improvements plan in year 3, 2 fiscal years from now. We have been working with Lane County to kind of defer their road improvement project to kind of see if we can match these things up. And we did submit for the congressional, the earmarks, the congressional spending, submitted that to Merkley and Wyden's staff last month. It seems to have fit really well with kind of having a compelling story and uniqueness that may be able to be funded that way. And get that distribution system up to current spec.
Because at the outset there were some people who were actually getting off our system and drilling their own wells.
Yep, if they legally could, yeah. Not all of them can, just based on size and distance to property lines and all that stuff. But yeah, I did hear that. Part of that is a council conversation about how, from a rates perspective, what kind of a customer are they? Where they're a member of the water system, but they're outside the city limits. We have other outside the city limits water users, and then we have a PVE class of outside the city water users. And is that rate methodology current, accurate, equitable, all that kind of stuff? And so I think there's a conversation to be had real soon on that. I'm hopeful that we first get word about the earmark and we can successfully say we have funding for it, and then we have that part of the conversation. I'm not sure if that timing is going to work, but that'd be the perfect way to roll.
At one point, I think eWeb was approached years ago about water supply.
Yep.
And it didn't work out well for anybody.
Yeah.
With new leadership there at eWeb, is it worth revisiting that down the road?
my staff answer is absolutely. Haven't really talked a whole lot formally with council about that yet. That has come up when we talk about regional support for a regional job center, the regional high density jobs. That is a natural to me, which then also provides on the residential side long-term stability. I think there's a 2013 feasibility study that Branch Engineering, our engineers firm, did that Brian put in front of me. So I studied that, doing some really rough number, extrapolation of what current dollar compared to the estimates from 2013. I think the capital costs are relatively doable. I think the challenge is when you talk about, the models build it in present value of money of what the annual cost of purchasing that water, because we're talking about purchasing water every year. So when we resell it, we don't get to make 100% profit on our resell. We're buying it wholesale and selling it retail. So there's a whole lot to be done there about what kind of a structure that could take. But I think the short answer is absolutely. I think that's to me, that's a leading item of water supply options, which may, have a lot to do with the relative need for storage. That can significantly reduce the storage needs, which, the third reservoir is a $6 to $8 million expense. So if you're incurring some capital, and especially if we have capital incurred by someone else and we deal with the operating piece, but not the capital piece, and we eliminate the need on our capital plan of a $6 to $8 million project that we can just erase, we may be in a very solid position. And we're also then hedging ourselves against, groundwater wells not behaving in the future like we might like them to.
Two questions on that. Would we have a multi-year lease with them? Is that what they've done with other?
I've met with the city manager in Veneta, and they have a long-term, it's a long-term agreement. I don't know exactly what the terms are. I think it's probably a long-term with a fairly long renewable windows. I haven't looked at that actual document, but it's a commitment. Typically, the way I've seen it in Veneta and in other places with other water providers is the jurisdiction agrees to buy a minimum amount of water. There's a kind of a flat annual or quarterly or whatever fee for that minimum amount. And then you have an option at a higher amount to buy more. And the way Veneta operates is they work their local water supply. They balance that to their goal is to never buy more than their minimum. And I think they've been successful at that, where they've calculated that out, and they do a really good job of staying with that really flat pricing of the minimum and augment with their own, which I think we have a similar potential that we could do here. And again, this is pre-conversation with EWEB at all. I think the things that we have going for us are that our total water demand, even with full-blown high density, high water use development on the 107 acres, how that total water amount works into EWEB's water rights and allocation were dinky. I don't think that part of the conversation is an issue. I'm sure there are others that will pose interesting obstacles for us to work through. Political being one and economic, the other. But I think from a pure water supply from EWEB, we would barely be noticeable on their graph. Yeah.
And the mayor did a good job there. Real good job again.
Yeah. Everything I've learned, and the current city manager wasn't there at the time, but he had a pretty good working understanding of how it worked. And it sounded like it went really well. Of course, it's not without its detractors, and you got to work through all that.
City of Eugene thought they owned all the water.
I heard a little about that. Yeah, I heard a little bit.
EWEB said, no, not really.
Yeah, I can't speak definitively about that one, but I did hear a little bit about that component of it. Yeah.
Just one little follow-up, Jim, then I'll be quiet. You mentioned Branch Engineering, and I know you're sending out an RFP for engineering services. And they have a lot of history with the city. And it would be Are you at all nervous about some other engineering company coming in with I mean, being stewards of public money, you have to do this. I mean,
Mhm.
that's just what you do, but that would be really, could be costly and detrimental to another engineering company to catch up.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure what word I would probably replace that with. I think I acknowledge that it would have some, it would cost us extra effort and time to transition to a new one. I have confidence that any engineering firm that we vet through, there are other engineering firms that would be highly competent, probably, I would imagine, cost competitive with Branch. That is not at all to say I would be just as pleased if Branch scored the best, if they, if they're interested and they submit a bid and they score the best and we don't have to navigate away. But it does happen fairly regularly that you switch engineers. And I think there is, just like when you switch auditors, every, same cadence, 5 to 7 years, there is some value in unfamiliarity. I think as well as there is value in familiarity. I think you develop new understandings. You look at things a little bit different. You bring fresh perspectives in. But you do have a lot of, there's some backtracking that you have to do on a history. And sometimes, just like with the PVE conversation with Councilor Lehman was there, we talked about, some of the history that was being kicked around in that meeting was relevant. And some of that history, while known to a lot of people in the room, was, well, maybe not known, wasn't very relevant to what we need to do moving forward anyway. So double-edged.
One other comment about that, it was right around budget time last year that Branch Engineering, they've noticed to us that they increased their fees to us 40%.
And the good part about, of course, doing an RFP is you get a fresh, comparison of rates and how that compares across others. The benefit of being in the public sector is, we can look at what Branch, charges in other firms charge other municipalities for. Similar, it's always apples and bananas. I mean, it's not quite because every city will use their engineering services differently. And I think we're looking at how, even with Branch currently and with whomever is in the future, how we want to utilize them. Where do you want to lean heavy on them in the lead? Where do you want them to do just a very finite scope of work, and that we project manage or administer, and we have a little heavier oversight, and then on other projects we have less heavy oversight from the staff side. So I think there's a lot of room there in kind of charting it, maybe a little bit different in some areas. And as the RFP is also set up to where we could have a contract and select an engineer of record that is really a city engineer that helps us manage other engineering firms. And which we do on the wastewater side already. We have Kennedy Jenks, which has done the majority of the wastewater work. So maybe we end up with a jack of all trades engineer on contract that we pay for hourly oversight and helpful direction and all of that. But the actual engineering design stuff, we may have a different transportation engineer and a different water engineer. Not sure how it'll all break out, but yeah, I think no matter what, even if it's Branch, it'll look a little different. The new contract and structure will be somewhat different, but clearly, they do have a long history and a lot of already embedded information at their fingertips that can speed certain things up.
Thank you.
Any other concerns, questions? If not, we will adjourn the meeting at this moment. Thank you all very much.
Y'all have a good night. Thank you.
See you later.
Yep.
Does that door actually unlocked all?
Thanks. Does it what?
Door actually unlocked all the time during business hours?
I think so. I'm not sure that I've ever checked it.
I didn't mean to blather on you.
I think so.
Okay, all right. Is it manually done that way, or has it got some kind of a timer?
All of our system is 8 to 5 logs last week. So I don't know if that's an exception to the standard, but it's might be. But it's not.
Mhm. Yeah.
But we leave this door.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not too bad this one.
Yeah.
You, these next three.